Hello, as the third installment of this course of Henry VIII, we will be exploring the domestic policies Wolsey integrated into Tudor society and their consequences. First, a definition of domestic policy is decisions and actions that impact England, including social, economical, and political. Whilst Wolsey typically focused on foreign policy, he also dealt with issues in England. We will explore domestic policy in relation to the justice system, enclosure, finance, the amicable grant, and the elephant audiences. The justice system. The court system was slow, expensive, and unfair. It favoured those with money and influence. Wolsey intended to make the system a lot fairer and emphasised the idea that no one was above the law. This is demonstrated in 1516, where Henry Percy, the Earl of Northumberland and one of the heroes of the 1513 Battle of the Spurs, was sent to prison for breaking the law. Wolsey achieved this by attempting to strengthen the Court of Star Chamber. The Star Chamber was a royal court intended to serve justice on behalf of the king. He did this by increasing the court's work rate, overseeing many cases in person, making the reasons for his decision public, encouraging poor people to bring cases to court, and supporting the cases of the poor against the rich. However, this intended improvement of the system brought about much criticism for Wolsey. Many felt his main motivation was revenge against the upper class, who often treated him badly because of his humble beginnings. And he quickly gained a reputation for abuse of power against those he held a grudge against. For example, as a young priest, Wolsey had been humiliated by Sir Amyas Paulet, who had him placed in the stocks, and when he became a Lord Chancellor, Wolsey summoned Paulet to the Star Chamber on a made-up charge. Wolsey then refused to see Paulet, and made him come to court every day for 5 years or risk losing all his property. These actions built up resentment against Wolsey from higher classes, and as his power increased, he was tasked with more difficult issues and no longer had time to resolve Star Chamber cases. Enclosure. Enclosure is defined as the practice of individual landowners fencing off land for profitable sheep rearing. The problem with enclosure was that it resulted in poverty in rural areas, because it forced farmers off their land and made the practice of common land, where villagers could graze animals and grow crops, redundant. It was a big issue, congruent with selfish and greedy landowners. Wolsey's solution was to set up an inquiry to investigate where land had been closed without prior permission. This led to 260 court cases being brought against landowners in 1517. Not only did this ensure the working class could get support, but Wolsey used this policy as a tool to weaponize against the rich. However, this action made Wolsey unpopular among the wealthy landowners, as they saw this as an attempt to attack them. Due to the influence of these landowners, in 1523, Parliament presented any further investigations into enclosed land, and enclosure continued to be a problem in catalysing poverty. Finance. So, some keywords. Direct taxation was when, traditionally demanded by Parliament, each community had to pay a percentage of movable goods. This would typically be in the form of 15ths and 10ths, where the rural areas paid 1/15 of their income and urban areas paid 1/10. A subsidy is an additional tax based on a person's income, which is similar to how England's tax system operates in the contemporary period. Forced loans were where monarchs could demand money from their subjects, and if they refused, they were imprisoned. On top of that, in reality, these quote-unquote loans were often not repaid. Clerical taxation refers to taxation on the church in the form of a quote-unquote voluntary gift, whereas Crown lands were lands directly held by the king, but made income through rent and lease. Movable goods were possessions that could be moved from one location to another, for example, furniture, livestock, and household items. The problem with finance is that the money Henry was making from the direct taxation was not enough to fund his plans of an aggressive foreign policy. Direct taxation made him a yearly income of £110,000, which was a predictable and reliable income, but was not enough to win wars abroad. This meant tax needed to be revolutionized. A solution to this was to improve the system of direct taxation with subsidies. This was successful as it made much more money and was fairer as commissioners were sent out to ensure valuations were accurate. So the rich paid more in tax as it was proportional to their income. This was one of Wolsey's successes and resulted in Wolsey raising enough money for Henry through false loans, clerical taxation and crown lands. The amicable grant. The problem was Henry needed more money to invade France. When the King of France was captured in 1525 by Charles V, but since Parliament is in control of tax, they refused to give him raised taxes because of his aforementioned aggressive foreign policy was very expensive. Wolsey's solution to this, however, was to create a new direct tax, friendly gift, without Parliament's consent, known as the amicable grant. This was especially bad as Parliament was not consulted, which ran the risk of rebellion. The consequences of the amicable grant were vastly negative. Obviously, people did not want to pay their amicable grant because many were too poor, and they were only given 2 weeks to find the money required. However, it incited further reactions and a revolt in Lavenham, Suffolk, which was the biggest revolt of Henry's reign. As a response to this, Henry feigned ignorance to Wolsey's tax, and as a result inflated Wolsey's humiliation and unpopularity. This resulted in Wolsey beginning to fall out of favour with the king, no further attacks being attempted, and Henry's wish to attack France being abandoned for the idea of peace. The Eltham Ordinances. The problem with Henry's palaces was that they were full of people, and so they were dirty, badly behaved, and used their money frivolously, meaning a lot of money had to be spent on the upkeep of Eltham Palace. The solution to this that Wolsey drew up was named the Eltham Ordinances, which was a set of rules consisting of servants who were sick and not needed were laid off, the number of people who were allowed expenses to things like food, drink, and lodgings were cut. Meals were at set times instead of constant. Dogs were banned, however ladies could keep small spaniels, and reduced the gentlemen of the chamber from 12 to 6. The Eltham Ordinances were designed to save money, but its true intention may have well been Wolsey trying to attempt to sideline his political opponents through reducing a gentleman of the chamber from 12 to 6. On top of this, Wolsey soon lost interest and many of the measures were not carried out in his lifetime. That concludes this video. Next video will be upon the topic of Wolsey's foreign policy.